you, Mayor. Really interesting. And now, instead of the talk by Klaipėdos Nafta representative, we will have a panel session because the speaker unfortunately is not available. But for the panel session, I invite all the speakers to take place to sit here. And also, I invite our additional panel member, Mr. Thomas Hasselton, as well. I was waiting for this for quite some time, so and I also have some questions. And by the way, if members of the audience have questions, or if internet citizens have questions, so please ask them, and I will voice them. So I guess the first question is for Thomas, and I guess that if we look into CCS storage and into Lithuanian situation. So there are two challenges to carbon capture and storage. So first is that it's not safe, and second is that it's not enough storage if we wanted to store it, onshore. And I just wondered what would be your opinion about that. Is this something that is even worth thinking about in terms of like Lithuanian geography, or we should just forget about carbon capture and storage in Lithuania?
Okay, thank you. I was given 20 minutes to actually put together a short talk. I did volunteer to make a presentation, but I was rejected. So I'm going to make a few comments. I'm going to start off by directly addressing that question, could we? Then I'll briefly talk about should we? What is actually the best solution for Lithuania in my view? And what would we have to do to get there? Okay, could we? I'm a petroleum geologist. I work for Vilnius Nafta, which is an oil company. We spend our time studying the underground. We know more about the geology of the Baltic than anybody, except maybe the Geology Survey of Poland. Vilnius Nafta is a substantial company. We've paid more than 100 million euros in various taxes over the years. And personally, I'm a petroleum geologist. You probably wouldn't believe this by my accent, but I'm a Lithuanian citizen, courtesy of President Adamkus. And I've lived in Lithuania for 22 years. So for those of you that think I should be speaking Lithuanian, I apologize, I don't. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was a company called Petrobaltic, which in fact still exists, but at that time it was a consortium between the Soviet Union, East Germany, and Poland. And they did a lot of exploration of the Baltic Sea. When you do subsurface exploration, you shoot seismic data, which I won't go into, but you use this to make maps of the subsurface because oil and gas is lighter than water, so it floats up and you need something to capture it. The same sort of argument applies to carbon dioxide, putting it underground. The best solution is to put it into these what are called structures. Based on their seismic data, which admittedly is many years old, there are a number of structures that are well known in the Baltic Sea. The biggest one is, for example, called E6. It's about 500 square kilometers and has the potential to store, some big number, 500 million tons, billion tons, something like that. And there are 6 or 7 other structures that are smaller, but are still in the 100 million ton type of range. Not too many wells have been drilled, but enough have been drilled to know that there is a good reservoir, as was indicated. Poland, it's true, doesn't really have any place to put it except one depleted oil field, which wouldn't hold very much. I mean, 50 million tons or something. but that's trivial compared to the amount of emissions that come out of Poland. Estonia doesn't have any place to put it, but Latvia and Lithuania both have significant structures offshore, better in Latvia than Lithuania. One of these was drilled, an exploration well for oil and gas was drilled, say, 4 years ago, and it proved that it's a fabulous reservoir for CO2. It wasn't any oil and gas there. Probably the most famous offshore structure is the one that borders the Latvian and Lithuanian border, called Dalders by the oil companies. Again, this is a big structure. If it were CO2 storage, it was a couple 100 million tons, that sort of number. People are, at least used to hope it was an oil field. My view is that that's not very likely. And probably within the next 10 years or something, somebody will drill a well there. Okay, the question was, could we do it onshore? And I will have to disagree with what my colleagues stated. A number of years ago, about 10 or 15 years ago, one of the well-known geologists in Lithuania called, his last name is Šlaupa, he did a study on could it be done onshore in Lithuania? And the conclusion was that in the oil and gas fields, there's not enough room. Well, this is just plain false. It's true in the oil and gas fields, there's not that much room, but we produce from about 6 small oil fields. But these oil fields are just the tips of a structure that is 150 square kilometers by 200 meters deep or something. And if you spend 5 minutes with a spreadsheet, you can see that the volume available for CCS is in the hundreds of millions of ton range. We've done a calculation of 140 million tons. Admittedly, we're not experts in it. But even if I'm off by a factor of 2, this is enough to store all of Lithuania's potential emissions from the big industries for 50 years or 30 years anyway. So yes, it could be done. And there are a number of onshore structures in Latvia. The biggest one, of course, is a gas storage facility, but there are also other places. In fact, Schwenks, which we've talked to, has a cement plant that's a few kilometers from one of these structures. If there's an obvious project to do, that's certainly one of them. Okay, should we? As has been indicated, heavy industry cannot get rid of generating a bunch of CO2. The big problem areas are fertilizer plants, oil refineries, cement plants. Well, we've got one of each. Collectively, they produce about 5 million tons of CO2 a year. If you look at the two biggest, which are Orlen Refinery, used to be called Mažeikiai Nafta, and Achema, they're in the 2 million ton range a year. What are they going to do? They got a free ride up until now because cost of CO2 was low, and they got all these free allowances back in the 90s when all this the rules were made. But if you multiply 80 euros a ton, which is the current price, time 2 million tons, this is 160 to 200 million euros that they're going to pay in fines. Well, their profits are somewhere between 25 and 50 million euros a year. So in the best case, they're bankrupt by a factor of 4. Now, my numbers might be a little bit off, but if we were talking, is it this way or this way, that's one thing. We're talking about is this way or this way, and it's clear that under the current circumstances, they're going to go bankrupt. Okay, the best solution, obviously, is something that people will actually do because they make money at it. We used to buy CO2 from Akema. Probably most of you know they make what's called food-grade CO2, and they sell it to people, mostly the Coca-Cola companies and whatever. But we bought it to inject CO2 underground, which Dr. Paul was referring to, where we're actually the only company in the Baltics that would have injected CO2. So you can buy CO2 from Akema for 80 euros a ton, and they will deliver it right to your oil field or whatever you want to use it for. The cost is probably a little higher now since electricity prices are up. So in effect, this is how much it costs. And this is just to capture it and deliver it as far as Klaipėda, or very close to where we are. If you then put it on a ship and ship it to Norway, this is another 100 euros a ton. When you ask Northern Lights, how much is this going to cost? In fact, I directly actually asked the energy minister of Norway this in the Baltic Carbon Forum about a month ago. He wouldn't say, but if you ask these guys over a beer, it's 100 euros a ton. So if it costs you 80 euros to capture it and transfer it as far as Klaipėda, and then another 100 euros a ton to take it up offshore Norway, you're talking $200 a ton. The companies in Lithuania will actually be better off just paying the fine, because that's only 80 euros a ton. So, I mean, they're bankrupt either way. They're bankrupt by a factor of 8, or they're bankrupt by a factor of 4. You know, who cares? They disappear.
So in general, you would be in favor of storing CO2 in Lithuania underground?
Well, I say it's the only
That's safe to
solution.
say.
Unless you want all major industry in Lithuania to move out, you have to. It's the only solution. And one of the nice things about this is, CO2 is not so good for the climate. At least a lot of people believe that. But it's really excellent stuff for enhanced oil recovery. In the United States, it's been used for enhanced oil recovery for 50 years. And 1 ton of CO2 on average will produce an extra 1 barrel of oil. So if you look at the numbers from a 1 ton of CO2 type of scenario, you get 80 euros of credit by sticking it underground. And if you then use this to produce 1 barrel of oil, you have another $80 to $100. So now your pot of money is somewhere close to 200 euros a ton. And it could be done for this amount of money. I mean, it's not going to cost us 100 euros a ton to stick it underground. It'll cost us 20 euros a ton or something. And all this talk about how complicated and unsafe it is, it's, in my view, silly nonsense. A lot of this conference has been about the war and how Gazprom sabotaged the energy of Lithuania and Europe by giving cheap gas. Well, I think it's generally accepted that Gazprom also sabotaged the shale gas industry of Europe, which was a real crime that our political leaders let them get away with that.
Dear Thomas,
Okay.
if I may,
Yes, sir.
if I may interject, we're a bit speaking about carbon capture, and I wonder maybe Michal has also, since this is a panel discussion, maybe Michal has a comment about the general feeling in the Brussels or with the European Union, let's say, or European Commission feeling. So will onshore storage be encouraged? Will it be discouraged? What is the general feeling here? So about the safety and about the overall legislation. So what our dear colleague speaks, is this something that is feasible from the point of view of European Union?
I don't think there's a political resistance to storing CO2 onshore. It's more a social resistance associated with some misconceptions. While it has been, I think, proven that it's the risk is minimal, but there is no. I'm not aware of any political constraints coming from the EU that would be associated with onshore storage.
Okay, and this leads to a question for Mayur. Is actually we saw that many of the patents, amount of patents peaked at 2009, and then it declined quite like precipitously actually. So does it mean that the technology is like mature enough, or there is just no interest? Because if it's mature enough, is it safe enough?
No, I think the reason for decline around 2009 also has to do with reduced investment after the economic crisis in 2009. And I think there was also a side effect of, there were some leaked emails about talking about climate change, which really hurt a lot of the research investment which was going into the CCS technology. So I think that is the reason, but at least now the talk is already happening. And I think when it comes to this question about, I think what could help is decoupling it, because, you know, energy need, we saw a lot of discussion about energy. But whatever energy you use, it has a carbon footprint. And we seriously need to decouple the two things, because carbon footprint have anything, and a glass bottle has a carbon footprint. So we really have to think seriously that the more we talk about it, the younger generation gets involved in this discussion, and maybe the public acceptance improves. I'm digressing a little bit, but it reminds me of one incident where Shell, when I worked for Shell, was formulating a project for carbon capture and storage in an area called Barendrecht. And it's a good reservoir, and historically, you know, it's been proven the CO2 is not so dangerous. You know, methane or the gas is more dangerous, and it's been stored everywhere, you know, and nobody objects to it. But people somehow, you could say real people who work in housing projects, they claim that if this will be stored, your house prices will go down. You know, so of course nobody wants their house prices to go down. It's a big investment for future for them. So the project never happened. So these are the kind of public perception which needs to be improved. And of course, yeah. So of course, on the technology side, we hope to see an improvement. But the economic crisis since 2009, if you talk about it, we haven't really still recovered. Many companies really haven't recovered. There's still costs coming, and now again recession, and also I don't know. I mean, I hope it will improve. Yeah.
Okay, we had another comment.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment along this regard, which is social acceptance of CCS. And probably most of you don't know, but Chevron came here 8 years ago to try to do a shale gas project. And we were very involved with that because, in fact, I was the one that made the deal with them. And as a consequence, all the crazy people were protesting in my front yard and on our oil sites and in front of my office. So when we started talking about doing CCS, all these same people showed up. So the idea that Gazprom destroyed the shale gas industry, they're simply, maybe not just them, but it's a misconception, hysterical nonsense that CCS is actually a danger to the population. So it's social non-acceptance, but I blame this a lot on the governments who will not stand up to the media who publishes all sorts of untrue.
Okay.
And I think part of the reason is also this, you know, when we talked about onshore storage, which was your initial question, you know, I have looked at some of these studies, you know, since I've been at KTU, especially from the Lithuanian context, and I have not seen a single detailed study, you know, with proper analysis. These are all wet finger guesses. you know, a geologist, I mean, with all the respect, you know, somebody who has worked in Lithuanian geology for many years probably knows things, but still, you know, CO2 gas is compressible, you know. You cannot say that I can store 1 liter of water in this bottle and 1 liter of gas. Gas is compressible, you can store a lot more probably. So, but that's the kind of wet finger guesses have been made. So, and it has turned out, these then became published and has turned out to be detrimental to the overall discussion about CCS in Lithuania.
Thank you. Camille,
Yeah, I'd like to address two issues which cropped up in your discussion. When you asked me how whether European Commission is supportive of onshore or maybe rather offshore storage, there are some regulatory barriers in the European legislation more to offshore storage than onshore storage, because the European Commission prefers the CCS directive and the ETS directive prefers CO2 transport via pipelines and not via ships, which is an impediment to the development of CO2 transport projects by sea to, for example, to CO2 storage sites in the North Sea, in the Northern Light projects, for example. Yeah, how you would like to address?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, okay. Thank you. So this is an issue which must be solved, and Norway already did it, for example, when concluded an agreement with Sweden, if I remember well, an agreement on CO2 transport, and addressed to European Commission with a question whether CO2 transport by ship to CO2 storage sites in the North Sea, in the Norway exclusive economic zone, could be considered by the European Union as eligible under the EU emission trading scheme. And the European Commission responded that yes, but it is not still expressed directly in the legislative act. So ETS directive needs to be amended in this field. And I would also like to refer to this issue of social acceptance. It is very hard to build public acceptance of CCS. I attended Baltic Carbon Forum, Mayor, and on the second day there was a discussion. It was the last discussion on this second day concerning social acceptance of CCS. And one of the participants told that research proves that the more people know about CCS, the less supportive they are, in fact, of this technology. So this is maybe a problem that won't be solved with more governmental involvement into a public debate. To be honest, for now, I don't have an idea how to efficiently convince people to CCS, because in fact, Mayor, as you said, when you get to know that your house prices will be lowered, you will be also opposed to such a technology. Yeah, so this is a very difficult issue, which was a major impediment to the deployment of CCS demonstration projects in Poland in the last decade. And this problem was also met at the same time in the Netherlands. There were some projects in the last decade on CO2 onshore storage projects, and there was social resistance which could not be overcome. And finally, the Netherlands decided to move these projects offshore, yeah, because offshore storage is much more safe in terms of the risk related to public acceptance. But unfortunately, Poland does not have such an opportunity, as we don't have enough CO2 offshore storage potential.
Yeah, sorry.
Just to pick up on the topic of the ETS, so that currently the ETS directive is going a revision. And this issue of multimodal transport is being addressed. So I suppose next year the ETS directive will be revised and adopted and approved. And it will hopefully formally be acknowledged that transport of CO2 by other means is also eligible from the ETS point of view.
okay, thank you.
Great.
So maybe. Yeah.
I was about to add that, I mean, I understand your point. I would slightly disagree because, you know, when you talk about things, you know, of course the discussion sometimes can be discouraging, but at least it increases awareness. And especially what is needed is more involvement of people who are younger in age, because this is a problem that they are going to face the most burnt of, you know. And when you discuss a problem, first is to acknowledge a problem, that the problem exists. And when you start discussing a problem, then maybe you would probably try to find some solution. As you said that in Netherlands, okay, they discuss it, then eventually find, let's do it offshore. But they at least decided to do it offshore. You know, if you don't even discuss it, you neither do it offshore nor you did it onshore. And you just wait for something to happen, and the bad thing will happen eventually, so.
Speaking of burning things, do you have any burning questions from the audience, either live or online? Yes, so please say the question, and I guess I will then voice it, unless we have a microphone, which I believe we don't.
I have a question to whoever is willing to answer to.
Okay, the microphone coming up, by the way, sorry.
As you were talking that we're facing with huge resources needed for legislation, researches, social acceptance, and so on. Do you think it's really worth to consider the CCS, because maybe it's easier to instead of CCS just to work on transformation, for example, from gas to electricity to green energy? Maybe it's just, cost and result efficiency, because needs lots of time. So I wonder your opinion.
Well, I guess we can answer that question, and Michal raised his hand first.
Yeah, thanks. I think that, of course, ideally, we would like to use renewable electricity wherever we could. One problem is that it's still a scarce resource. And first of all, we should first decarbonize the electricity grid. Then if we have some renewable electricity left, we can consider using it for other purposes. But as I said, there will be processes like in the case of cement. No matter how much renewable electricity you have available, you cannot overcome the problem of the chemistry of the production process of cement. We would basically have to invent a new way to produce cement and then to convert all cement production facilities to this new system. Can we do that in the time frame that we have until 2050, where we are supposed to to achieve net zero? I'm not sure, and I think this leaves you with no alternative other than rolling up your sleeves and working on CCS deployment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just to answer another element of your question, I think the point is quite valid that we should think about energy transition, which I think a lot of discussion already happened. But I'll give you an example. To use gas, natural gas for cars has been available for a very long time. But you could see for yourself how many people drive cars with natural gas in Lithuania. Still more prevalent is diesel cars. And the challenge is you could have the energy transition, but that's going to take time. It will just not happen like in one day. And these targets we have to meet by 2030 or 2040. 2030 is 8 years from now. And we're still talking about, hydrogen use for vehicles, I think, still far away. So we have to think from that point of view that there will be a space for other energy resources, renewable energy resources, but still the hydrocarbons still dominate. If not in Europe, maybe not in some specific countries, but if you look at India and China, 3 billion people, they're consuming things, they're using cars like anything. So, yeah.
To address your question, I think direct air capture was mentioned previously, but it must be obvious to everybody that we're not going to hit this 1.5 degree target, and most likely we're not going to hit the 2 degree target, and that there's going to be a huge excess of CO2 in the atmosphere. The only plausible solution, in fact, the only conceivable solution is to capture it But then what do? Well, you have to put it underground. There's nothing else to do with it. So aside, disregarding this is not sexy and this is not beautiful and this is not perfect, it's the only solution. So, whether people will accept this or not, that's the choice they're making. Do we want to be plus 5 degrees and all dead, or do something sensible?
Okay.
Yeah, you raised a very important point, but as we discussed CCS not as a solution which will be at the margin of the energy system. Yeah, it will not serve power utilities, all power utilities, or etc. It will just complement the efforts we make for the decarbonization and for achieving Green Deal. Michal, you talked about CCUS Forum and the European Energy Commissioner, and she told her that no CCS, no Green Deal, that we can't achieve climate neutrality without CCS. But still, the challenge of implementing CCS is far less difficult than transforming all the electricity system and energy system to renewables in terms of scale. Yes, because CCS is designed mainly for industrial plants, but we need firstly to decarbonize the grid, as Michal already said, and we must also remember that CCS is a very electricity-consuming technology, which we should also take into account when designing the strategy, how our energy system will look in 2030, 2050, and beyond.
So there is a lot of complexity. We are not advocating that CCS is the only way to go. It is some way to go, and whatever is logical, we should probably do. But before going on to doing that, there is another question from the gentleman up front. I don't think the microphone works. Or
yeah, maybe it's working now. Yeah. So my question would be for the Polish colleagues about the law. You mentioned that there's a draft law for 1 year. So how did you manage to get a draft? Like, who did it? I mean, was it like from the industry, or was it from the government? How was it? I mean, how was this process designed, basically?
Okay, may I? Yeah. Okay. It somehow coincided with CCUS.pl project, which is a result of a tender made by the Ministry of Climate and Environment to pilot a CCUS cluster in Poland. During a kickoff of this project, the Deputy Minister of Climate and Environment announced that Ministry of Climate and Environment is working on this draft amendment to the geological and mining law. When it comes to the emergence of this act, although I don't know everything, I suppose that there was some push from the industrial stakeholders, especially from the company Lotos, especially Lotos Petro Baltic. This company Lotos is currently being, let's say, consumed by another Polish fuel company, PKN Orlen. And this company Lotos Petro Baltic, has been planning for more than a decade, I suppose, to use CO2 to enhance oil recovery in a depleted oil field in the Baltic. And since this company is a state-owned enterprise, I believe that there was much push from their side on the ministry to somehow allow for an enhanced oil recovery in the Baltic Sea, and this is why this amendment was drafted.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Isn't there like opposition to the enhanced oil recovery using CCS in Poland?
In fact, no, but I think that this is due to very low awareness of CCS in general and EOR especially. I can only recall one example of more burning public debate on CCS, which was in 2013 in the parliament when CCS directive was being implemented. And then one of the parties which makes the ruling coalition, the coalition government ruling today, the government is formed by Law and Justice Party, but there's also a small faction, Solidarity Poland, which also which was also in the parliament in 2013, and they were strongly opposed then to CCS at all. And given that this party, Solidarity Poland, has now a very strong influence on making legislation in Poland, as they are a decisive faction. Yeah, there is just a bunch of a few MPs, but they are decisive in every issue, and they can somehow oppose to pass this draft amendment through the parliament in the future, I suppose.
Thanks, Camille. I think that is all of the questions. So we can close with closing remarks. If you have 1 or 2 sentences to tell about what you think would make most sense in terms of carbon capture and storage, do tell. If not, we'll wrap up. In any order.
Who's first?
In any order.
Okay, so maybe I will be the first, since I am in Lithuania, a Baltic country, and the event is focused on Baltic states and CCS. I would stress one more time the necessity to explore the possibilities of storing CO2 in the Baltics. I don't know how it is viable from the geological point of view, but I remember my conversation with an important stakeholder from Air Liquide company, which is developing Poland-EU CCS interconnector project, and they have to transport CO2 to Northern Lights facility in Norway because there is no storage possibility in the Baltic Sea, and they are still seeking for this possibility of storing CO2 in the Baltic Sea because it would be much cheaper for them and also would make CO2 storage much more efficient and profitable for other Polish stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you for the 2 sentences. I guess, Michal?
So great postulate by Kamil. I would add that next year and the year after, national energy and climate plans are going to be revised. So my plea would be for the governments to include CCS in these national energy and climate plans, or if CCS is included, to give it even a more prominent role.
Thank you. Thomas?
Okay, my first sentence is, this is never going to work if only governments are behind it, because even though they take a great deal of our money, they just don't have enough money to do it. It will only work if people can actually make money doing this. And the only technology out there by a factor of about 100 is using CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. This is not the perfect solution for long term, but it's better than any other solution out there. So my second sentence, is that there has to be some practical approach to do this, and money has to be found to do it. And this is the only way it conceivably can be done in our lifetimes, mine anyway.
Thank you. Igor?
So I sit in academia, so I have to say that there is a need to do a more detailed study, proper detailed study with the right data to see how much CO2 can be stored in Lithuanian context. That would be my first sentence. And the second is that, there is a need to also do more research and funding in the research, and that can only happen once the ban on the CO2 has to be relooked at, because without that there is no funding coming in to do work in Lithuania on this.
With that, I would like to thank the esteemed panel, and also for the audience members, both live and online. And if you want to learn more about the white papers, or you want to converse with some of the speakers, there will be information available. So one of the sources of that information is the ccs4ce.eu. and also the Greentech Vilnius LT webpage. So thanks a lot, and thank you.
Thank you.